Our guest is Daniel Seidemann, a great friend of J Street and one of the foremost experts, I think, on Jerusalem. Many of you know him and have been on his tours of East Jerusalem. Just a few words of bio. Danny's been a practicing attorney in Jerusalem and a partner in a firm specializing in commercial law since 1987. Since 1991, he's also specialized in legal and public issues in East Jerusalem, and in particular worked on issues and cases related to government and municipal policies and practices representing Israeli and Palestinian residents of Jerusalem before the statutory planning boards regarding development issues. He's argued more than 20 Jerusalem-related cases before the Israeli Supreme Court. So we're very fortunate to have a guest of Danny's caliber, and obviously the situation in Jerusalem, in Israel, and in the occupied territory is deeply, deeply worrying. But I will ask Danny to start off with an introduction on the situation as it is today, what the violence is doing to the city, and please feel free to make your introduction, Dan.
Okay, thank you very much. What's the situation? There's no status quo, and there's no status quo acting. We're in the midst of a popular uprising in Jerusalem, like we haven't seen since 1967. As late as 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were hearing from friends in Washington that this is just another round of perennial skirmishing between the tribes. This is new, and it's important to articulate what's new. Now, I've been out and around with you guys in J Street on any numbers of occasions during the past several years since you were founded, and I took you into the depths of East Jerusalem. I was able, as an Israeli, as a Jew, and somebody who's fairly well known, to visit all of East Jerusalem with impunity during the entire Second Intifada. I would be in the Shuafat refugee camp 2-3 times a week. Today, when I will be taking you folks out and around in another couple of weeks' time, I can't tell you where I'm going to be taking it, because 90% of Jerusalem is off limits for me, because going there unaccompanied by a Palestinian colleague or in a diplomatic vehicle would entail risks I'm not willing to accept. Now, this is not Jewish whining alone. What applies to me applies to Palestinians. Many of the Palestinian men in Jerusalem, some 35,000, work in Israel, primarily in West Jerusalem. And the restaurant workers who I know will not go to the dumpster and throw out the trash alone. They'll go out in 2s and 3s, because there are vigilantes out in the streets of Jerusalem who hunt down Palestinians for fun, and much of this is not being reported. This is new. Jerusalem was never the divided capital that people purported it to be. The only place that Jerusalem's the undivided capital of Israel that will never be redivided is in an American presidential campaign, particularly among the Republicans. It was always a divided city. It was never divided like this. If there's any good news in this, that it's giving us a conclusive answer if the two-state solution is still available in Jerusalem, it certainly is, because the border exists. Full stop. And it goes exactly where the politicians would be placing it. But it is a border of fear, a border of hatred. It is in some places becoming a physical border with blockades, concrete blocks, barbed wire. But even when there's no physical embodiment, the cognitive, psychological border is so powerful that it's as effective as an electrified fence. Hatred is endemic, popularized. It is not acceptable in respectable company in either the Israeli side or the Palestinian side to say anything positive or respectful about the other side. That's new. In addition to that, we've arrested in the last several months probably approaching 1% of the kids in Jerusalem, boys under the age of 18. As of January 1, it was some 700. The full reports on the numbers are not out. I just saw one that there were another 20 or 30 arrested today. I have a Shin Bet document, one of the rare documents they put out about the involvement of Palestinians in terror during the Second Intifada. Between 2001 and 2008, there were 270 Palestinians arrested in security-related offenses. We have arrested many more since Rosh Hashanah. That means that more people have been arrested in the last 6 weeks than were less arrested in the entire 7 years of the Second Intifada. This is a popular uprising, the likes of which we have never witnessed before, and that's new, and it's not going away.
Thank you for that introduction. Sobering words that you said, Danny. I wanted to ask you, in the Second Intifada, we had horrific bombings of buses, of restaurants, in Sparrow. Many people remember the horrible bombing of Sparrow, which is right in the center of Jerusalem. The bombing repeatedly of the number 18 bus, and these all took, mass casualties, 18, 30 at a time. How do you explain the psychology of what's happening now, given that although these have been horrific attacks, the total death toll on the Israeli side has been 10, I believe, so much, much less than just a single bombing of the 18 bus, and yet you're describing a psychological environment that is the new and much, much worse. How do you explain that?
This is spontaneous combustion. Nobody had the power to ignite this round of violence, and no individual has the ability to put it out. 15, 16-year-old kids have been going out on a nightly basis for more than a year, with some breaks in between, and clashing with the Israeli police. They do not read the New York Times, nor do they take their marching orders from Abu Mazen at the UN General Assembly. The Second Intifada was more organized. It did have a military infrastructure, and it was not organized in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was targeted. It was very dangerous, as you correctly said, in Jerusalem. Where was it dangerous? In the 200 yards between my office and my kids' schools, where there were 10 suicide bombings in the period of about 3 years. The violence came from outside the city, with rare exception. That is not the case here. It's popular, it's endemic, it's not focused on Ben Yehuda Street. It is spread throughout the city. Initially, when this uprising broke out a year ago, in July of 2014, it was contained to the Palestinian neighborhoods. But increasingly, that violence has spilled over into Israeli Jerusalem and into West Jerusalem. So it's a different kind of fear. It's less focused, it's more widespread. There is a mutual distrust and anxiety, which I did not even witness during the Second Intifada.
Let's talk a little bit about the Temple Mount, Har Habayit, or Haram al-Sharif, and which has been a focus. Now, how would you describe or apportion responsibility for the way that has emerged as a focus of so much of the violence?
Invariably, the detonator of convulsive violence in Jerusalem is a real or perceived threat to the integrity of sacred space. That is generally the Temple Mount, but in the past, by the way, it's also been the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It is the detonator, it is not the explosive device. It explains why Jerusalem erupts. It does not adequately explain why this convulsion is continuing and has been going on for 14, 15 months. And there are other reasons involved. Now, there are the episodic reasons in and around the Temple Mount, where you've seen tinkering with the status quo, which is extremely dangerous. And the status quo on the Temple Mount has morphed even when the technical arrangements of the status quo remain in place. There was no status quo on the Temple Mount during the Second Temple period, during the British Mandate, excuse me. There was no status quo because there were no Jewish claims until recent years. In recent years, with the ascendancy of the Temple Mount movement in Israel, and they're going mainstream, and they're having voices within the Israeli government, the Temple Mount has become the quintessential arena of skirmishing, where you have a minister in the Israeli government on the peak of violence, the most violent day in memory, going to the Temple Mount, contrary to the policy of every Israeli prime minister since 1967. He prays. The police tell him, don't. It's contrary to public policy and government policy. He does. Now, based on the limited connections that I've had with God, I have been led to understand that it is possible to pray silently and nobody will know. Well, Uri Ariel doesn't do that. He's a bit like the ultra-Orthodox, whom you may have noticed on international flight are not allowed to pray under 30,000 feet because it does not sufficiently annoy the other passengers. He has to pray openly. He does Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, so all of the Muslims will know. And then periodically he goes on camera and says, I would be delighted in my capacity as Minister of Construction in the past, Agriculture in the present, to see the third temple built. He's not a marginal kibbutzer. And what we are seeing is a change of the ecosystem, a very significant one, in the framework of a technical status quo. So when Netanyahu says, I'm maintaining the status quo, he's correct, but it is a highly inadequate answer. The fears of the Palestinians and the Muslims are not paranoia, and they need to be addressed and they need to be calmed. There is so little faith between the parties that that does not appear to be happening. These episodes are sitting on top of a much broader trend, which I consider to be alongside of the territorial threat to the two-state solution, perhaps as great a threat to the long-term viability of Israel, an existential challenge to the Zionist enterprise. We in Jerusalem are witnessing the ascendancy of absolutist exclusionary faith communities. The traditional communities are being marginalized, they're being silenced, and they're in retreat. We're witnessing the empowerment of those who weaponize faith. Our Temple Mount people who aspire to restore a biblical kingdom, establish a Jewish hegemony, and to restore some kind of Jewish expression on the Temple Mount. We have the end-of-day Christians, the dispensationalists, the Pastor Hagis, who love us so much that they would like to see the end of days when their love of Jews will be expressed in the option that we will be given to either convert or burn. But they're on the ascendancy. And then there's the nastier wing of the Muslim Brotherhood who aspires to a religious war for their own reason. The traditional religious establishments are not like this. The chief rabbinate, moderate, the historical churches, the Vatican, the Protestant churches, the Orthodox churches, and the Sharia theologians and courts are fully understand that if there will be any one faith community with hegemony in Jerusalem, it will be a living hell for everybody, and that a stable Jerusalem must speak in its multiple voices. Those groups are now marginal, and it's the Hagis and the Temple Mounters and the Shabab of the Brotherhood who are on the ascendancy. So even if we see this round die down, and cooler heads take over, and steadier hands guide policy, the overall trend of radicalization will remain in place. This is going to be with us for some time to come.
Let me just tell anyone that's watching, viewers, that if you need or if you wish to ask a question, please email it to info@jstreet.org, or you can, as some already have, send a question on Twitter, which is @jstreet.org. Okay, and the first one comes from Stuart Schlossman, who asked you to comment on the Prime Minister Netanyahu's comment about the blaming the Holocaust on the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and the effect that that has had on the debate, on the situation. So please.
rhetoric is volatile in Jerusalem. It's a dangerous substance. The Mufti, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, was an anti-Semite, he was a thug, and he was a Nazi collaborator. By the way, I know many of his family, and they are as wonderful as he was despicable. But at this point in time, to abuse those historical facts and then distort historical facts in order to smear the Palestinians and its current leadership is intellectually dishonest, it's irresponsibility of the highest order, and it is the last thing we need. We need to be respectful of one another's narratives. Believe me, there are bones in the Zionist closet as well. Don't go there. And it is deeply disturbing that a very intelligent prime minister of Israel, with a great familiarity of Jewish history and European history, would use such false and distorted facts for cheap, short-term political gain. I am deeply disturbed by it, and so much so that I'm questioning whether we're not witnessing Netanyahu 2.0, which is basically in your face to all of the rest of the world, with the exception of certain wings of the Republican Party and certain branches of the dispensational evangelical movement. Deeply disturbing.
Danny, one of the things I noticed in my trip to Israel recently, which I think is new also, is that I perceive a great hatred among Israelis now, and especially young Israelis, for Palestinians, which I never really kind of felt before. Am I right? Is this a change, something that's happened, and if so, what do you attribute it to?
First of all, it's happened over time. This uprising did not break out 6 weeks ago or 2 months ago. It broke out in the beginning of July of 2014 and is now getting the attention it deserves. That the evolution of hatred on both sides of the divide, the personalization of this conflict, is something that's been going on for a long time. The first Intifada discredited the possibility or the credibility of Greater Israel. The second Intifada, which came after Camp David, did much to discredit the possibility or the credibility of a political process. People no longer believe in the ability of a political process to deliver anything. On Israeli, this breaks down to a state of deep denial where we're sipping cappuccino on the edge of a volcano with a metastasizing occupation, and deep despair on the Palestinian side. We have a generation of youngsters, good kids, decent kids, who've never met Palestinians. And we have Palestinians, kids who've been growing up. I know these kids, good kids who hate me because all they know of their experience is that I am their occupier and there is absolutely no way out of this. And one of the things that we've reaped for the lack of a credible political process in recent years is a deep mutual dehumanization that's taken place. It's very troublesome. Israel began its occupation by exporting some of our democratic and humanistic values to the West Bank. That has changed. There were protracted periods in which occupation was a disease in remission. I'm not going to sing the praises of occupation, but it was not always pernicious and as toxic. Today, it is not a disease in remission. It is poisoning the soul of the Israeli people, and racism is becoming rampant. And being a victim on the Palestine does not ennoble their souls either. Racism and hatred is as rampant on the other side as it is here. This is also a function of taking a conflict which could be resolved in a border and turning it into a tribal civil war. We're seeing the dividends of years of Israeli governments not moving towards the two-state solution, but in fact building the one-state reality. Go out into the streets of Jerusalem, take a hard look at the interactions. You're looking at the future if the two-state solution is lost.
A question from Peter Frey: how can the leaders diffuse the current tension?
Number one, by toning things down, stopping to score points, imposing radio silence on inflammatory statements coming out of both Ramallah and Jerusalem, engage in sober, non-polemical, discrete discussions, how to pull back from the brink on the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif. That can be done. Jerusalem, for the last 1,300 years, in its old city, 1 square kilometer, has contained the three mutually incompatible narratives of Judaism and Christianity and Islam. Jerusalem knows how to do that when it is not being abused for political advantage. Locate those elements in Israeli and Palestinian society that are poking their fingers into the most sensitive nerves of this conflict, that are demeaning and denigrating the narratives of the other. Put in place pragmatic arrangements on the Temple Mount, and first and foremost, declare openly, we are going to negotiate in earnest a two-state solution that will end occupation, and it will end occupation in Jerusalem. The two-state solution will take place in Jerusalem, or it won't take it all. Declare that as our shared goal. Don't leave it as a theoretical. Reopen Orient House. We have an international obligation to reopen Orient House. If we wanted to reach out to the Palestinian political leadership in East Jerusalem, there's nobody to reach out to, because we have crushed every political expression more radical than a scout meeting, and sometimes we've crushed scout meetings. Open a political center for Palestinians. Allow them to. Enable any Palestinian organization, body, or party who renounces violence to be active in East Jerusalem. Resume security cooperation between the Israeli police, the Shin Bet, and the security authorities in the streets of East Jerusalem, in spite of our sovereign claims. We did it in the 1990s. We can do it again. But we can't do it on the cheap. This will not end in a military operation. It will not end with concrete blocks sealing these neighborhoods. It will not end by building sewers and giving the Palestinians trinkets from our budgetary treasure chest. The only way that this ends is in a border, and that's the only way that occupation ends. That is not immediately available. The one thing that could seriously reduce tension and violence is to move resolutely in that direction and show we are serious about engaging on these core issues. It can't be done on the cheap.
We have a question here about demolitions in Jerusalem and the general attitude of the Israeli municipal authorities towards Palestinian economic development. Can you describe the situation pertaining to the economic situation in the Palestinian neighborhoods, and the way that the Israeli authorities have A, not invested in them, and B, prevented economic development from taking place?
When we speak about demolitions, you can talk about the planning demolitions for illegal construction, and currently the demolitions that are receiving the attention correctly are the punitive demolitions, which have many of the trappings of collective punishment. I will address the former. If somebody's interested in the latter, I think it's important. Let me give you some hard statistics. In 1967, there were 190, there were on the order of 69,000 Palestinians living in Jerusalem, 70,000. They lived in 12,600 homes. Today, the population has quadrupled. There are in excess of 310,000 Palestinians living in Jerusalem, and they are living in 50,000 homes. Namely, the number of houses and the number of population has quadrupled, more than quadrupled. However, in this period, Israel has given no more than 4,500 building permits. That means that overwhelmingly, More than 50% of the houses built in East Jerusalem have been built without a legally sanctioned building permit. That's not an accident. Where does that derive from? We have a curious theory. That theory is, if we do not allow the Palestinians to build legally, they will lose interest in sex and childbearing and take up chess. There is no empirical evidence to the effect that this is working. This goal is to maintain the demographic balance of the city. In Jerusalem, the birth of an Israeli child is a simcha, and the birth of a Palestinian child is a demographic problem. And that is reflected in the planning regime. You also spoke about resources. Anywhere between 10, 12, and 15% of the budget goes to the 37, 38% of the population in East Jerusalem. We can all scream Gewalt, racism, discrimination. There certainly is that, but that misses the point. There is a law of political physics. Politicians will never allocate time, energy, money, or resources to people who can't and won't vote. The Palestinians of East Jerusalem are permanently disenfranchised. That is the core of occupation. They are disempowered. And as a result of that, this can't be reformed. It can't be improved. It's not about getting Mayor Barkat to behave better. If I were the mayor of Jerusalem, I would not be doing much better than Mayor Barkat, because the system is inherently dysfunctional. Israel cannot rule wisely or fairly over a national collective that's disempowered, and that's why this ends in a border. And that's reflected both in the allocation of budgets and in the planning regime.
That segues very nicely into a question that we got by email from Manny Oiswang. Could you please clarify the legal status of Arabs in East Jerusalem? They're not Israeli citizens. They can't get Israeli passports. What is their legal status? And
let
why?
me give you a formal answer. I'll give you a formal answer, and I'll give you a pithy one. The formal answer: when Israel annexed the 70 square kilometers that we did of East Jerusalem, we annexed the land. We did not annex the population. In 1948 and 1949, when Israel found itself with several 100,000 Palestinians who remained within Israel's borders, we didn't ask them. We made them citizens. Israel granted the Palestinians of East Jerusalem the status of permanent resident, not the status of citizen. The Palestinians of East Jerusalem do not have the right to vote in national elections. They do not have Israeli passports. They do have the right to vote in municipal elections, but they elect not to, because for them that would be declaring we are Israeli. The Palestinians of East Jerusalem, not only formally but substantively, have never been viewed as Israeli by Israel, nor have they viewed themselves as such. In the 2013 elections, there were more than 157,000 Palestinians who could vote for mayor, not in the national elections. Of them, 1,101 participated. That is a 0.7% voter turnout. It's worse than Kansas, Dorothy. Of those, 561 individuals voted for Mayor Barkat. I know the family, find a mishpacha, but it's 561 people out of 157,000. That cuts to the core of the inherent dysfunctionality of East Jerusalem. We don't want to give them rights, to empower them, and to make them part of our community. We never offered them citizenship. They never wanted citizenship. They have the right to ask for citizenship. We have the right to say no. Inherently dysfunctional. Do the Palestinians of East Jerusalem have rights? Indeed they do. They have the right of freedom of movement. They can work in Israel. They have social welfare benefits. They have property rights. But those rights always hang by a thread. And the status of permanent resident basically says to them, you guys have got rights, and we're going to be nice to you if you behave and if you toe the mark. But if you act what we consider to be poorly, or if we really want to abrogate or annul your rights, we can take them away. And your property rights and your residency rights and your social welfare benefits hang by a thread. They are a barely tolerated minority, and that is at the core of this conflict.
A question from Batya Miller, which came by email. Thank you for all the questions that are flowing in. Have the police and soldiers been given a shoot-to-kill order when facing Palestinian attackers? Are they trained to disarm attackers without killing them?
I'm asking the same question. I don't know the answer. I've seen very disturbing films. On the other hand, these people are protecting us. They're in enormously difficult situations. It is easy to sit in my room here in Arnona in Jerusalem and judge soldiers or border patrol people who are in very, very difficult operational circumstances. But it is my clear impression that there may at least be a subtext. The terrorist is not to come out of this alive. I would hope that that's not the case. I'm not sure that it's not the case. I would reserve judgment on this.
A question from Mira Sukharov by email. If there were to be a two-state solution involving a border, how would that border actually look in Jerusalem? And how would the idea of a border square with the supposed goal of a shared capital in Jerusalem?
My friend, retired General Shlomo Gazit, once told me, I never liked the Oslo process because I was never sure if it was a marriage or a divorce. Israelis and Palestinians are heading for a divorce. Most Palestinians would like to drive me into the sea to drown, and most Israelis would like the Palestinians to be driven into the Jordanian desert to die of thirst. Neither option is available, and the two-state solution is the best fallback position, default option of getting rid of one another. The major challenge to the Zionist enterprise and to the Palestinian national movement in these times, occupation. And there is only one way that occupation ends. Occupation ends in a border. There will not be a two-state solution throughout Israel-Palestine and a one-state solution in Jerusalem. There will be a border. It will be a genuine border. I will have to present a passport in order to visit my friends in Sheikh Jarrah at a border crossing. I'm not in love with that, but this requires radical surgery. Having said that, there will be special arrangements that deviate from the binary strictures of territorial sovereignty in and around the old city. Whether it will be a special regime or special arrangements, there will be no physical border likely within the old city, but on its perimeter. But that will be the shared Jerusalem. Jerusalem is going to be politically divided. In all likelihood, it will not be a shared city. For those of you who find that disturbing, and I am among them, because for me, Jerusalem, my life's work is a living organism, the day the border goes up is the day that that border will begin to unravel. We will see that Jerusalem will heal after the agreement much more quickly than anybody anticipates. But reconciliation in Jerusalem will not begin until the divorce is completed, and the divorce is symbolized by a border.
A question from Jessica Steele, which came in on Twitter. France recently proposed placing international observers on the Temple Mount. Is this a realistic suggestion? Would it calm tensions? Does it have any chance at all of getting any traction?
I love the French. It's a wonderful idea, and it was bungled miserably. I am asked very often, what happened today on the Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif? And I follow these things as closely as anybody, I would guess, and more often than not, I don't know the answer. Because one of the things that you discover in your work in Jerusalem is that It's an egalitarian city in one sense. Everybody lies about it. Jews, Christians, and Muslims. It is quite possible that a religious war in the Middle East will break out over an event on the Temple Mount that did not take place. Rumors are as powerful as reality. My suggestion was and is do a mini Mahsom watch. What's Mahsom watch? It's the wonderful women, sometimes they allow some of us men to go along, who stand and observe the behavior of Israeli soldiers at the Mahsomim, the checkpoints. Their very presence has a moderating effect. Having the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif in Jerusalem, is sort of like having a small Iranian nuclear facility in downtown Jerusalem. It's open to the public, but you elect not to observe what's happening there. Now, when you turn this into a Security Council resolution or a presidential statement, and you do this openly, it makes it very, very difficult for the parties to go along. If there were to be a group of individuals with no authority, simply to sit there all day, every day, with a log and observe, I think it would give us new tools about how to bring the trends of radicalization under control.
Danny, I want to ask about the Israeli internal political situation. There was a poll that appeared when I was in the country that asked the question, who do you trust the most to look after your security? And the number one person in the poll was Avigdor Lieberman, who was in the opposition, the very right wing, and the number two was Naftali Bennett, who was the head of the Beit HaYehudi, the Jewish Home Party. Does this make Netanyahu's freedom for maneuver very, very narrow in the sense that anything that he does that is in any way conciliatory is immediately attacked by the right as being weak?
Netanyahu, even before this round of violence, was vulnerable domestically as never before. Excuse me. Narrow coalition.
I would offer you a glass of water, but you're 7,000 miles away.
Thank you. He's the moderate flank of his government, and every neurotic member of his coalition, and there are a few of those, could bring him down. He is also vulnerable internationally as never before. His credibility after Iran and his credibility over the two-state solution is at low ebb. Now he has a situation that Mr. Anti-Terror and Mr. Security is incapable of delivering security to the Israeli public, and he doesn't have answers. So much of the support for Netanyahu is unraveling. I believe that's what we're witnessing.
Would you like to take a break? And
ask a long question so I can cough.
Yeah. Would you like to take a 2-second break and get a cup of water?
I'm okay. Go ahead.
You're okay. Let's talk about the U.S. role, because there was a meeting today, I believe, in Berlin between Secretary Kerry and Netanyahu. Thanks very much. He'll be meeting with Abbas. He'll be meeting with King Abdullah. What can the United States do that's realistic and useful and helpful in this situation?
Re-engage. I mentioned earlier that the kids clashing on the streets don't read the New York Times. Usually the political climate does not have a direct impact on the volatility of Jerusalem. I believe that there is an oblique but significant impact today. Since the collapse of the Kerry Initiative on April 1 of 2014, there has been zero political horizon. Nobody knows what happens next. There are very compelling reasons that the president is being told, walk away from this conflict, Mr. President. There's only grief in it for you. You can't want peace more than the parties. You have limited energy, limited time. Go to places where your policies can be consequential. Very compelling arguments. The administration is in the midst of a review of its policies, but nobody knows what happens next. Never before, in my memory, and I've been working on this issue on a daily basis since October 1991, never before have I seen so little hope or little faith in the ability of political processes to make things better. So the efforts and the credible efforts that are being made by Kerry today in Berlin and tomorrow in Amman are enormously important. That's the volunteer fire department. That is going to perhaps douse the flames for a bit. It will not put them out unless there will be the revival of a credible political process, not another hollow one, not another charade of negotiations that are basically non-existent, but a serious push to address the core issues, which will inject a renewal of faith in nonviolence and politics and a sense that the occupation can end. What we're seeing now may die down. It will re-erupt in short order. This is not going away. I'm not sure if this round of violence is going to lead to a major meltdown, such as another war or a collapse of the PA. I tend to think it won't. But since none of the underlying causes of this popular uprising are being addressed, and some of them are being exacerbated, if and when this subsides, it will not disappear. It will die down, and the periods of time between the rounds of convulsive violence will become shorter, and the intensity of the violence will be incrementally higher in each round. In the past, I have warned that we are in a clear and present danger of two threats to the two-state solution. One, a balkanized map territorially, geographically, demographically, that will prevent the creation of a border. And secondly, the morphing of a political conflict which can be solved into a religious conflict which cannot be solved. I now add a third caveat. We are approaching a time, perhaps by the end of the Obama administration's second term, whereby the Israel-Palestine that President Obama turns over to the next president will appear to be similar to the kind of Iraq that President Obama inherited from Bush. Chaotic, dysfunctional, hemorrhaging, broken, and unfixable. We're not there yet, but we're not far off.
Well, I think that would be a good place to leave it. Thank you very much.
On that pleasant note.
Daniel, if you
May
want
I end on a personal note?
Remarks, please, before we say goodbye.
I would like to end on a personal note. I would like to thank the people here who have ripped themselves away from the riveting Benghazi hearings. But actually, I don't want to be snarky about the Benghazi hearings, because one of the finest American diplomats I ever know was Chris Stevens, the U.S. ambassador in Libya, who was killed in Benghazi and served in Jerusalem. He was a great friend of Israel and the Jewish people. He was a great friend of the Palestinians, and he was a great friend of Jerusalem. And it's deeply disturbing for me to see his memory desecrated in this way, and I would like to use this opportunity to share that memory, a different kind of memory, with you, and to honor his memory in a more dignified way. Thank you.
And thank you for that comment, and thank you for your support and your friendship and your time and your expertise and your dedication. It means so much to us. And on that note, I will say goodbye from Washington and goodbye from Jerusalem. I hope to see many of you at the J Street Policy Summit that's coming up this weekend, or down the road on my travels around the country. So thank you very much and goodbye.
Goodbye.